After they've completed their first speech, which is an introduction of a significant individual, which is an ungraded speech, the students in our public speaking class at Clover Park Technical College go into a different kind of speech with new expectations. I have something on the website on Angel that shows me telling the students exactly what the differences are between that first speech and all of their subsequent ones. But I'm going to concentrate now on one element of all the speeches after the first one, which has to do with live community interviews. What I require is that all the students, for each speech after number one, interview a person whom they do not know and document what they're doing in that interview, what happens in the interview. In the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the reasons why we do this. I'll talk about what's on the Angel site itself, and then a little bit more about what we do in our course with respect to the interviews. The purposes of this requirement are twofold. First of all, I hope and have found over the years that this activity makes the students more comfortable initiating contact and gathering information from people whom they don't know. A lot of them tend to be somewhat shy. They may not want to be in the public speaking class to start out with, as I've said a couple of times earlier in this guide, and they are probably not very experienced at making contact with new people. So this project or this assignment is intended partly to help them become more comfortable. Also, in a sense, it's causing them to have to think a little bit more than they have in past contacts with people, because I tell them that no, they should not just go out and choose some random individual who might be threatening or harmful or dangerous to them, but rather that they need to give some serious thought to whom they want to talk to. Second, the assignment is meant to help the students care a little bit more and learn a little bit more about their world and how it affects them, because the way that I structure this is that they have the opportunity to interview someone who can either provide them with new information about the topic they're going to be speaking about, or who can help them become better in presenting the speech that they've already been planning to give. The first one of those two is really the kind of interview that will help them, I hope, begin to care more about the world. In the past, some of our students have interviewed public figures, entertainment figures, business people, executives, and even political people, including at least one U.S. Senator. What you'll find on the Angel site is in two places right now. On the main site for the course, for the master for this course, you'll see a section that says Course Resources. Beneath that, there is a link to something called Hints on Conducting Interviews. You have to click where it says Interviews under the lessons, on the front page there. Secondly, in the lessons folders, under the lessons tab, there is a folder that says Interviews, within which there are directions for doing interviews, as well as an interview form, and what I would call sort of a light-hearted video that shows one student talking about some of the ancillary benefits he encountered in doing an interview. Now, let me talk a little bit more, third of all, about what we do in our course with the interviews. I explained to the students up front that a speech which they give that is very good, but which does not refer to the contributions and thoughts of someone that the students have talked to, is not as good as one that has everything else in it that's exactly the same, but also does make that kind of reference to comments and observations from someone in the community. So I make the case to them, just as I did with extras, that there's always the opportunity to improve a speech by basing part of what the student says and strengthening part of what the student does on the basis of a community interview. I have to persuade them that this is both feasible and advantageous to them. Sometimes they resist this. Sometimes they even ask, well, if I turn in a form to you that purportedly has the ratings of a community person about me, then how do you know that it's not falsified? How do you know it's not fake? If I get that kind of question, it doesn't come up always, but if I get that question, I tell the students, I don't know that. I don't know that you're being honest. However, you're adults, and my assumption is that you're going to behave like adults. The form that the students are expected to complete when they do the interview, and which they're hopefully going to be working on before they set up the interview, looks like this. It's called an assessment of a student's community interview. It's the form that I mentioned that's in the folder that says interviews under the lessons tab. I'll talk a little bit now, as I do to the students, about what this form is meant to do. Perhaps I should start on the second page, which has a section saying questions you ask the person you interviewed. Ideally, I tell the students that they really ought to plan their interviews. There are things about this in the hints section that I mentioned a moment ago. But sometimes students will say, well, what do I need to ask someone when I interview them? To which I respond, it depends on what you want to find out. Furthermore, what you want to find out depends upon what your speech is about and what can make your speech better. So you may recall that I show the students a diagram of how to work on a speech outline and how to plan a speech sequentially. I tell them, with respect to the interviews, that the interview might take place once they already know what their main points are, once they have some supporting details for their main points, perhaps before they've decided on their introductions and conclusions, but at a time when they might still gather some exciting, interesting, captivating material from someone in the community that they could put into the main part of their speech. It might turn out, too, that they would instead decide to take something that their interviewee says and put it into their introduction or conclusion. That's all up to them. Anyway, here is a space for the students to write 3 questions that they have decided prior to the speech, hopefully, that they want to ask the person they're going to interview. I tell them that there are 2 main purposes of an interview. One is to gather information that they otherwise would not have, which will illuminate their topic, and the other is to see how a person of some intellect would respond to the plans that they have for their speech. So if they have an outline already and they think it's perfectly fine for prime time in the classroom, they can share it with a person they don't know and ask that person for that person's honest advice or honest perspectives. After this section, there are several questions that are meant to help the students reflect after their interviews on what they did prior to the interview, during the interview, and at the conclusion of the interview. On the front of the form is a section where the interviewee himself or herself is asked by me to rate, to evaluate the student's behavior. So I'll just go through them. Did the student approach the interviewee in a polite and respectful manner? Did the student explain the purpose of the interview well? Did the student have clear and easy to understand questions? And did the student thank the interviewee appropriately for the interviewee's time and ideas? So ideally, this kind of guided assessment is going to focus the students on the value and significance of the interview in such a way that the student is going to take the whole process seriously. This doesn't always happen, but I would say that my experience has been that even the students who tend to doubt the value of this activity or think that it might be very difficult for them, even logistically at the start of the school term, usually say by the end of the quarter that they felt it was good for them. And occasionally, as you'll see in the video in the lessons, under the lessons tab, a student will really, really, really enjoy the process. I explain to the students that there are several reasons for them to do this. One, of course, is to get a decent grade, because if you don't have your interview, you're cutting 13 points out of your score for a graded speech. But another reason is that you might actually cultivate a relationship with one or more people who could be valuable to you in your career. Now, Clover Park Technical College being a technical college, this really tends to mean something to our students, because it's sometimes only 3 to 6 months after this class, or sometimes almost immediately after this class, that our students are going out and looking for work. So I explain to them what informational interviews are, and work this into perhaps what we say in speech number 4, the why you should hire me speech, in the sense that I explain to the students it's to their advantage to get to know people who might be in their career field, not just to ask for work, but to find out what the work is like, and to make it clear to people that they are really interested beyond the paycheck in the career field, so that they will have a greater chance of being accepted and have a better network of contacts for their future. The students almost always are very good about completing the interviews. I'm beginning to ask them more and more now to mention their interviews in their speeches. When they do this, it almost always adds something valuable to the content and the tenor of their speeches. It hasn't happened as much as I would have liked, but this is partly because the whole idea of doing the interviews and of doing reading citations, for instance, is somewhat new and perhaps daunting to many of our students at our college, whereas I don't think this is necessarily the case in other two-year colleges, where students are perhaps more attuned to this kind of academic activity, have perhaps had a little bit more experience in the classroom with group dynamics, and whose goals include a lot of interpersonal interaction in the future. This has been then a description of the community interviews that our students are expected to engage in public speaking at Clover Park Technical College, including the purposes, what we have on the Angel site that helps the students prepare, and also what we specifically do in the course to make this happen.